No one's ever tried that. And since then, no one has ever done it. Since then, no one has done it. This is the first time that's attempted, if you maybe include the double, the earlier one. Robert Hockey is mushy on all this, if you read him carefully. This is much, the way I'm talking is much more gay-centered and moral and consistent and hard-hitting. This is a real daring piece. And then Spring at this time was under Hillman's influence still, and he was what thought of himself as a rebel. His name's not here, but nonetheless, he wanted to include things like that. That's why I think they included both of these papers and when they got published in this journal, because they wanted to be uppity. And this is a strong example of allowing that uppiness to remain in here. To know that the power of the twins is independent of heterosexual procreation. Unquote. Such generative capability gives the twinship union, parenthesis, as a homosexual form of ego-self relationship, parenthesis, the viability to sustain the individuation process in gays in a manner parallel to that occurring through heterosexual procreativity. That's the fundamental theoretical point really it wants to get to. And all the argument has been to establish that final point and justify it. So a final little comment there, the feminine and gay men. The original text went something like, and one more point I would just like to add in light of the thing I mentioned above, and then it goes in the homosexual libido. So the homosexual libido extends to the feminine in gays. Under the aegis of Aphrodite Urania, the feminine is not projected as the sole figure, but rather constellates an A. That's their assholism again, an A. I would never say that. And that's stupid that they said that. Again, they're jittery, and that's not even a technical word, an A. Please, it's disgusting. I would delete an A and say like a helpful attitude, but rather constellates a helpful attitude towards the soul. You see how much better that is? But rather constellates a helpful attitude towards the soul. That is one of receptivity. Such a feminine homosexual attitude can be seen in Gnostic thought about Sophia and Jesus. Here I'm just referencing this, I don't get into it all. And in the myth of Amor and Psyche, and many thousands and thousands of variations, as I've alluded to. It is the Sophia, the psyche in a gay man, or any man in him, which allows him to orient and gain union with divine eros. From this perspective, the positions of Psyche and Ganymede are metaphorically the same. It is not a question of effeminizing an otherwise masculine person. In becoming and being gay, a man's ego becomes attitudinally, quote, wife, unquote, to his masculine soul, quote, husband, unquote, and he attends to Psyche organized homosexually so as to undergo the process of transformation. In this homosexual way, a gay man, still a man, but now, quote, receptive, unquote, becomes the crucible for psychic maturation via insemination by the Spirit of God. In enacting this transformative union, a man may achieve unidividuated androgyny, and thus wholeness and completeness of being. Their stupidest error. That should not go and thus being. And thus wholeness and completeness of being. So if there's another place where they mutilated it, it makes sense. At the very end, right? And thus being, that's moronic. He was all wrong. See, it makes no sense. So they have to castrate what they do. Isn't that typical? And these are people who are in psychology. Picture why it is that we set up our own institute, you see, and why is it that uranium psychoanalysis becomes its own field. It's the only way it's going to be respectful of being psychological in the original radical sense, in my opinion, of psychological, contemporary psychological understanding, and gay-centered. It's the only way to do that. I see no other way to do that. Okay, so those final words, and thus wholeness and completeness of being, is actually real key to the whole paper also. Just like the title. It's not just being. It's wholeness and completeness of being. Which has to do with what is gay liberation about? What is gay liberation? Right. Gay liberation is about ultimate wholeness and completeness of homosexual being. There's one way to describe gay liberation, or complete gay liberation. And that being true for all gay folks. That's why we would be interested, say, from starting with gay liberation, why we might want them to become interested in gay individuation. But only through the fulfillment of gay individuation and through the completeness of gay liberation. Otherwise, gay liberation is hollow. For example, we have political rights, or we don't get married. But there's not gay individuation of the personality. What use was it to have gay marriage? What use was it to have gay rights? I'm not saying that not have rights was good either, of course, but rather what are people putting their energy towards? This has to do, of course, with addressing the whole problem of why the gay community is so now drifting more and more into the camp of assimilationism. Why more and more there's a vitiation of anything that is outside the norm, outside the system of power, really. Just gay variation, branching more and more of all such variations, the Italian variation, the black variation, or the mosaic of what in my opinion is a rotten system. Nonetheless, okay, so there we went through the paper. Oh, we have good, we have a little time. Excellent. It was not a long paper, as you can see, but quite packed, as you can also perhaps get intimated towards by the way I was alluding to this and that. Though I didn't go into it in any detail. I think that would all be really, really interesting to go through that much more carefully, particularly. In fact, all these documents, would be really, really intriguing in terms of further education, not just in terms of grasping these notions, but in terms of advancing all this further. To go into all that in greater detail, I can feel it. Having read the thing to you, this is probably, my guess is, I don't really know this, but my guess is this is the first time in the 23-year history of that paper, except perhaps for maybe once, it's ever been read out loud. That's interesting. There was such a lack of culture around gay intellectual pursuit. And that little bit only exists within the circumscribed domains that are tolerated by the academia. So anything that's at all a little more extra than that, even not even just outrageously extra, just a little more extra, like this scene here, you see how fringy it is, how much on the edge it is. A little support and encouragement in our society for something like this. That's why, in my opinion, what the Institute here and the psychological approach to gay liberation is so useful. Because it's not just in terms of helping to better complete the purpose, the moral purpose, the ethical purpose of gay liberation, but more so that larger political revolution, which needs to happen, which we can see is not happening according to any of the traditional political routes that have attempted it. The establishment of unjust power has continued, in spite of everything. It's overcome every obstacle against it so far that I've seen, meaning that all societies I see are controlled by and run by unjust power, and always have been. All human societies, never seen a human society that's not been, no matter what they call themselves. And especially this one, current one we live in here. I don't see any easy escape, unfortunately, from this pickle, since it is so all-consumingly able to absorb all opposition, it seems to me, and marginalize what it can absorb. And constantly be doing both those things, with endless renewal of its ability to do that. I have to hand it to the rich and powerful. But nonetheless, that's not all there is. And that's not all there is. And what I just read you is an attempt to try and scaffold something that goes in a different way. It's not useful for its own sake, ultimately, what I just read you, but rather to attempt both create an island of gay-centered appreciation in the Jungian literature, and also in that way to provide a foundation for anyone who would attempt to pursue the sensibility described in the article. All of Jungian thought, as well as, in my opinion, any serious psychoanalytic thought in general, in written form, certainly, as well as what's thought purposefully, has a activist purpose to it, in my opinion. Otherwise, the person's a hypocrite. If you ever meet anyone who says they're psychoanalytic and they're not what I would call a political activist in their psychoanalytic attitude, they've neutered it. My guess is it's because the influences of breederism have been worked, as they are everywhere, and neutralize things that are disturbing to the breeder status quo. The breeder status quo needs to be stable in order, they think, to raise children. It means everything needs to be calm. That's why everyone so loves the stability that society brings. You'd think that was just normal. You'd think that's the way just human culture is. To be steady and regular and stable and always the same and always reliable. I'm telling you, it's a breeder ideology, the whole fucking thing. You're so drenched, our world is so drenched in an uber pro-breederism. And not just new, I'm saying to now. I'm saying ever since the breeders got a hold of things, more and more they view it this way. And a one-sidedness, which is violently obscene. So I want to suggest that what I just read you is a little piddling attempt to try going in some other direction. First of all, intellectually, because it is a paper, and in a serious format, but with many implications to it, some of which I just touched on now. Hopefully some occur to you. Or perhaps you've had some reactions. Or thought there was anything interesting or not. Or disagree with something, I don't know, who knows what. About what I've read or what I've shared this evening. Thank you all for giving me this opportunity to do this little historical moment. I mean, as I mentioned to you, this was composed 23 years ago. It's a whole different world now from that time. And certainly would not be an article which would appear in this journal now. Some aspects of it would still be handled in a very, could be handled in a very contemporary way. Other aspects could not, as I alluded to a little before. But we do have a little time left, and I want to invite us all to perhaps have a little interacting here. I'm sorry, I find all this so stimulating. I'm just kind of babble here. I don't want to go on too much. There's a lot of details and history and theory and ways that we're going now and how to develop from this point. And I don't know what all. I can just babble and babble and babble now. But I don't want to just yak on one side because we want to have a club atmosphere here, which means not that the big Grand Poobah gets to stand up here and you all sit on your butt squirming for the time. That's not what we're trying to achieve, even though that might be an aspect of it. Not too icky away, I hope. So I want to give you all a chance to, we want a club atmosphere a little bit too, which is kind of dump something in the space. We're all kind of here. It's a different kind of space than otherwise would be the case. About the topics under consideration. It's an atmosphere that is great to try and take advantage of. What social atmospheres are like this? None. There's nothing like this. So we want to structure it mainly, and then make it not too confrontational or anything scary. So we have the chairs like this, and this is pretty regular. Someone's up here presenting, so it's pretty simple. But I want to, if possible, also include an aspect of it that provides at least some give and take here. If you all might feel okay about that, or not, it's okay too. I don't feel like you might have to participate here at this point. But if you might have any questions or reactions or anything you'd like to share or impressions, many of the things I've shared will produce impressions, I'm sure. I've just inadvertently, not thinking about it before, I revealed various intriguing items like homosexual fascination was not strange to him, but he would never talk about it. It's not the same as the official mark put up. It's a really interesting topic. Or some of the hidden issues around my article appearing in this journal, which just popped out here a little bit. Isn't it an odd world? I'm sure if any of you have been artists or producers in other fields of study, you might have brushed up against some homophobia or other sorts of problems that I've alluded to around this little thing in here. Also, if you have anything like that to share, I'm sure we all love that too. Not that anyone has to do that or has had such an experience, but just in case, okay? So I want to open this up, okay, and give you all a chance to respond or ask questions and so on. If you could please volunteer if you'd like to by raising your hand, and I'll call on you one at a time. And could you please then first say your name? Okay. So I'd like to invite you if you have any comments or questions or reactions or anything like that. Someone's very eager over there. or reactions or sharings or anything like that. Please feel free to raise your hand and we'll see how that goes. Okay, now. Yes?
Yeah. My name is Gaston. I'm very excited hearing about this. What struck me is your comment about postmodernism. Because I remember the time, and I thought, well, how come it didn't go further? And you mentioned that it kind of got squelched by the modernist, postmodernist.
The development of the ideas by postmodernism.
I was wondering how that happened.
How was it that happened?
Yeah.
It was because basically homophobia, it's an interesting question, Gaston, because homophobia wasn't killed off by this movement to attempt to have less homophobic articles in the Jungian journals. It did not overcome the prejudice of the Jungians against homosexual valuation. And so after there was a certain initial appearance of these kinds of materials, because I think there was the journal editors and others saw a severe lack of response, a severe lack of interest by anyone, as if no one cared about any of this stuff, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of arrangement. Everyone was actually terrified, in my opinion, to get into this stuff.